Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and today we're going to begin our study of the Gospel of Mark. We're going to take a few days to introduce the book of Mark. We're going to give a general introduction. We're going to introduce the text and talk about the author and then the characteristics of this unique book, and then we'll get right into the text. This morning, I'd like for us to first ask ourselves, why do we have 4 Gospels? And they all tell the story of Jesus, but they're all different, and they all had different audiences to begin with. And the 4 of them, give us a 4-dimensional picture, such a 4D experience of the life of Jesus. Matthew, clearly a gospel written primarily to Jewish readers. He doesn't have to explain Jewish customs or define Jewish words. He is very careful to show the lineage of Jesus through both David and Abraham. He emphasizes the fulfillment of prophecy, and throughout is comparing Jesus to Moses and demonstrating that he's the one Moses talked about. Luke's gospel is a researched biography, very modern, very much what we expect from a biography, and Luke's Greek is the most polished in the New Testament, and he tells us in the first 2 verses of his gospel that I researched this biography. John, writing at the end of the 1st century, fills in some gaps, answers some questions that we would have if all we had were the synoptic gospels, and really places Jesus in context theologically, cosmologically, and with the absolute simplest language. John is very much an old man's gospel, an old man who's reflected on the meaning of things that he's experienced. Mark, I believe, is clearly written to a Roman audience. Mark does have to explain Jewish customs. He has to translate Jewish terms. He's not that concerned with the fulfillment of prophecy. Mark's gospel, most scholars still believe, although it's falling out of fashion a little more year by year, most people still believe that Mark's gospel was the first of the 4 to be written. It's one of the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They're called synoptic because they see things generally the same. In other words, they tell the story of Jesus in a straightforward fashion, not exactly in chronological order, but in a straightforward fashion, telling the story, whereas John, having access to the other 3 Gospels, being written so much later, is not written to plow that field over again, but to explain the things and to give deeper meaning to some things, and to fill in some details that we don't have yet. And by John's writing, the temple in Jerusalem has been destroyed, and Old Testament Judaism with it. And so they're all a little different. There are some things in Mark that are unique to Mark. The beginning and ending are a little odd. Maybe that's not a good word to use, but different from any of the other Gospels. In the text, John the Baptist and Jesus, they just show up. We're not really given any explanation about their origins, which we are in the other 3 Gospels. And then the end is problematic, and it's a puzzle, and there's no solving of the puzzle, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But it has an abrupt ending and then an addendum added on, tacked on. There's no other way to describe it from the texts that we have than that has happened to the end of the Gospel of Mark. In the Gospel of Mark, we have the only account of the widow's mite, the healing of the blind man at Bethsaida, and the parable of the absent householder in chapter 13, which is interesting because there aren't many parables in Mark's Gospel. In fact, there are no sermons proper in Mark's Gospel. And yet, as we read Mark's Gospel and continue to talk about it, we're going to see Mark give us so many little details that flesh out the story, that bring it alive, that make us see it vividly in our mind's eye. so many small details that really spark our imagination and turn this gospel into almost a cinematic experience. It's very visual, and we'll talk more about that as we continue to introduce Mark's gospel. Well, next time we are together, we're going to talk about the text itself and the nature of the text. Thank you so much for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.